Good afternoon. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this afternoon's seminar. Thank you very much indeed for those who are here now. Thank you for our online participant. Appreciate you joining online. We are expecting some people later. There's a class that conflicts with this. So there may be people coming in later. Don't worry about it. So we are very happy to be hosting today Davlin, Sylvia, and Ambrose. And they will, of course, pronounce their family names in their own language rather than have me torture it. But I can manage Davlin, Sylvia, and Ambrose. They are from the Economic Policy Research Center, which is a semi-autonomous research center affiliated with Makerere University, which has a very distinguished history, and the Ministry of Finance. So they are STAARS Plus Fellows. That's a competitive scholarship that is implemented by the Feed the Future Innovation Lab for Food Security Policy Research, Capacity Building and Influence. And it takes a long time to learn to say that without stumbling.
Very well.
Thank you very much, Mariam. And implemented specifically by our partner, Cornell University. And it's a program that is designed to help very capable emerging research scholars to go through the whole experience of preparing a journal quality paper. That's something that our PhD students do here as part of the program, but for many in our partner countries, they don't have that kind of opportunity. And so the STAARS Plus program provides that opportunity for them. This is very much a work in progress. Rui Benfica from the National Food Policy Research Institute, graduate of this department, is with me a co-mentor for our Ugandan colleagues. And we have been working over the last 2 or 3 days on some initial empirical analysis. So this is very much a work in progress. It's not a final paper. You'll see that there's a lot of questions that we're seeking your input on. Yeah, please think of it as a work in progress where we're still at the formative stage of developing the paper and not any kind of final presentation where we have all the issues resolved and all the kinks ironed out. So with that introduction, Davlin, please go ahead. And I think you'll be joined by a co-presenter at some point. Okay, the floor is yours, Davlin. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Hello, everyone. My name is Davlin Mboga. Like I said, Sawi and Ambrose colleagues were working on this. So the title of our study is Thinking for Productivity. So I want to say before I go any further, we can use your input and suggestions right away as I go. And feel free to interrupt me as I present, so you can chat about so that you don't forget. I'm good at this is recording, so you can. So this is going to be like as a so this is the conventional presentation outline that I'm going to follow. First, I'll try to convince you that this is a good plan to try and escape motivation and research questions. Then I'll present what we have seen through the literature and what other scholars have done. My colleague will present the methodology, the data, and the preliminary findings. We don't have like much of the conclusions, but then we shall present next steps. So, as a motivation and why we do this, we see that agriculture is still a big deal. Looking at the proportion of individuals that are employed in the sector, the agriculture sector is still employing a big number of people in sub-Saharan Africa, and the COVID-19 pandemic has kind of opened our eyes. It has rekindled this debate about agriculture and then how industrial transformation can be tackled better. So we see that within this COVID-19 pandemic, many people have gone back to agriculture as it became a fallback position when businesses were cramped in the towns, so people went back. So it's still a big deal. So we cite out so we cite out the engagement in subsistence agriculture, which increased from 41% to 50% number of households. That was before March of 2020. Before March of 2020, we had around 41% of households, but this seems. So we think that if we are looking at low-hanging fruits, if governments are looking for sectors where invest and all this agriculture is still sector to go. So this is like the distribution of working populations. This is for Uganda, looking at the different categories of people that are engaged in agriculture. Don't mind about categories of this is different definitions how we define the constitution, then the ILO. So these are different categories. We see that still agriculture as an aggregate, which is agriculture, forestry, and fishing, the percentages are still high. But what noting is that those that are engaged in agriculture without any monetary gain still substantially big. So that is another question. Why are people engaged in agriculture, but then they are not participating in the market? So, sorry about that. So here we come in. We have seen.
One thing I observed was urban. Why would people be engaged in agriculture in urban areas?
Okay. So I think here we can look at the definition of urban, because in Uganda we can have metropolitans like Kampala, where the suburbs are still having arable land. So it can be an issue of definition and all that, but even our sample, there is some number of urban dwellers. But my colleague can say.
Yes, that is true. Because the development within the urban areas are within some specific regions. We also have land where people do farming. Yeah.
That's common in many other African countries as well. That for these two reasons, one is the land location and people actually relocate there peri-urban, and the other one is that when you look at the structure of economic activity, you find a lot of agriculture in urban anyway.
Like income.
But for analytical reasons, sometimes we restrict analysis to rural areas for reasons that have to do with the policy. Sometimes it's actually focused in rural rather than in agricultural households. So it's an interesting.
You don't think this has to do with what do you call those? They may be living in urban areas, but they may have land in rural areas and like absentee farmers. You don't think that's that phenomenon?
That is part of it, but also, sometimes when you buy land, sometimes to keep your land when you're not using it or you're planning to construct on it, they do some small farming in there, plant some of these crops in there, as well as keeping the land.
Like which crops are being cultivated in urban areas?
You will see them later on in the presentation.
But mostly these crops that are not perennial. Perennial crops always are for rural areas. You wouldn't find coffee in like the peri-urban areas like in Kampala. So it's mainly maize. You grow it 4 months and then it grows. Then you remove it and construct your house. So because of what he says, like the land grabbing and all that, you wouldn't want your land to be so high when it pick up. I think.
Sorry, and then what about the subsistence part? I mean, even that seems very high in urban area to be not earning your income or participating in market.
From agriculture.
I mean, 27% of.
Yeah, we can have an issue with definition here, how we define subsistence, but this is strictly saying that you're not participating in the market you are producing for
Yes,
your
so
own
it does
consumption.
that mean maybe these are more like home garden kind of agriculture? They just produce vegetables and in your data, they might be classified as having, they are being farmers, but they are just producing some vegetables and for home consumption.
Yeah.
And that's not their sole livelihood, source of livelihood.
Yeah. That, if you say like that, actually, it's a possibility. But looking at the different, if you look at the nomenclature of the crops grown in Uganda, you would say we don't grow one crop. So if I'm doing vegetables here, I would do vegetables for that. But then I have another crop, but still a sizable number. Let's say 0.4 acres nearby, but it's maize just for my family. So still, even if we look at the definition of subsistence, I think we can agree or disagree on which definition of subsistence we can take, but there is still a sizable number of people who are participating in it. And that's one of the reasons why we think it is one study. So moving on to the problem. So we have seen the absorptive capacity of the sector. It employs people, but then the people it employs don't participate in the market. So there is a challenge there. So some of these problems are persisted. We can't say we are the first people to try to study them. There is been persistent growth in productivity, and we are concentrating on the crop side. We had livestock, but decided to concentrate here. And then it feeds into the low crop market participation and performance. For example, if you don't produce a lot, you will not meet your food needs, so you only produce for your own consumption, then you will not participate in the market, then you won't get money from your crops. So this is where we come in. So we do a small comparison. I don't know if this is visible. So we sample out a couple of crops, looking at the potential yields as at research stations, and then we look at the average of what the farmers are producing. So looking at, for example, maize, with the research yields being at 8 tons per hectare, and then the average prevailing productivity being 2.3, there is a gap here. This shows that there is potential for enhancing this productivity. And this is a similar trend throughout all these. So we kind of single out some of the key crops that are grown in Uganda, and then we concentrate on that as I will explain further. So for here, what we can pick out still to emphasize our point, the low market performance, is still the number of households that you can see in absolute numbers that are still not participating in the market. And this is still aggregated rural and urban. But when you look at our sample of agricultural households, it's like 90% is rural, so like 10% of the urban. So I think it goes back when we get the sub-sample, we kind of sort of sample. So moving on, we set a very simple research question. We humble researchers, we don't want to say we are doing close research. So we want to know what's the effect of technology. Where coming from, and the sample is mainly small, the farmers who don't produce like every. So how do we answer the question? But before we do that, we are not the first to do this, and we want to build on what has been done before. So some of the literature looks at productivity by looking at the partial measures of productivity. That is yield, or let's say land productivity, which is yield per acre or per hectare, and they find a positive relationship. We see improved seeds and manure, which would be, in this case, like the organic fertilizer, also has a positive relationship. But we also have some interesting literature on complementarity of technology use, which is key, because we know agronomists recommend that you have organic fertilizers, you apply in the farm, you should at least supplement with some organic fertilizers. And then we also know that some improved seeds are bred well or flourish better when they're supplemented with some inorganic fertilizers. So we shall see some of the questions we are trying to ask ourselves. We don't know whether we can answer when we get, or whether our ask them, but we still ask them. Because what we find is that, yes, complementarity is key, but then this paper by Megan and Barrett shows that in sub-Saharan context, mostly farmers use these different inputs in isolation, like organic fertilizers, and that's it. So some other literature looks at like the emerging technologies, like phones and how they diversify markets and all that, and then all the productivity enhancing technology. So as for this, Benefica and colleagues find it impacting sales intensity. So beyond impacting productivity, it impacts the sales intensity and all that. So roughly, what do we want to fit in, and how do we want to fit in? And so according to what we have seen done by past researchers, most of the work looks at productivity, I mean, technology use, market performance and technology use, and these are always done pairs and all that. So we are attempting to see how we can link productivity, market performance and technology. That's our attempt, and we think if we manage to do it, we shall have a contribution there. So I will call my colleagues to present something fancy here, then
Thank you so much, Dublin, for the eye opener. Just to recap on something. Part of the selected crops that Dublin presented, Uganda is operating under a given agro-industrialization agenda, where they look at very big population, highly living in agriculture. So they have selected some crops that they think that by investing in it, maybe in the next 5 years, at least some people can move away from the subsistence economy to the cash economy. That's why we presented some statistics on the selected crops. On the methodology part, we try to conceptualize this study in a way that you have a household that deals in cultural produces and services, and they are faced with decisions. So mostly in Uganda, look at productivity is low and market performance is low, and this is most of the households within Uganda. However, we think that there are some technologies that are available, readily available. For example, most of the farmers that deal in crop farming also do livestock farming, and they could use some of these fertilizers, though some of them have to buy from the market. So a household is faced with the decision to make whether to adopt fertilizer or not to adopt fertilizer, which is subject to also some other factors. They are latent. Some other things like costs, household characteristics may allow you to adopt or not to adopt a given technology to use. But at this point, I would also have to take out that the technologies here, the use of fertilizer and the light is more of what is available for production. However, next time when Dublin comes back, we'll try to show you things to do with the market, the use of phone, the access to internet, and all that also affect performance within the market. So we hope that if a household adopted a given available technology, they will be having a better crop yield and sales. And if they don't adopt, then the story remains the same. And then there's some lessons learned after adopting that. Maybe next time when they're doing farming, some other results could be achieved. Yeah, so let me just explain in detail how we measure some of these factors so that when he's explaining the regression, it's easy to understand. So we look at crop productivity, which is basically yields. We look at kilograms per acre of land, acre which is the NCR, the acre of land. Or we look at the value of output. If we get the total output and then look at the monetary value, and then divide by the units of land used for producing that output. Then the total factor productivity largely depends on the amount of input you've used. For example, given fertilizer, what did you get from that direct crop? However, we have to note that my colleague will come and present some results here, but they are highly preliminary. We are still having a back and forth discussion on the next steps, but we have some findings that we got that I don't say they are conclusive, but it's still a work in progress. Then crop market performance. Here we hope to use the two-step one. However, this highly depends on the type of crop. In Uganda, for example, let's say crop report, we are not very good consumers of coffee like other countries, so it's highly produced for sale. So sometimes the Heckman model works better if you're having a decision to make for example, the maize, where first the household makes a decision whether to consume the maize or to sell part of it. And then upon making a decision of selling, that's when now they have some sales values that they say participate in the market. And that's the first stage. So we are going to run the probability model, which is the following a normal distribution. We feel this one is better than the logic model. And then we shall run the fixed effect, subject to the fact that we are also still working on the instrumental variables, which is appropriate, just to avoid the genetic issue. And then later on, we are planning to develop the crop sales index, where we look at your value of sales in relation to the total value of output. So let me not dig into this, but that's what we have now.
Just a quick question going back to the yield response model. Are you grouping a variety of crops together? Or are all crops in the same regressions here, or are you splitting that out by crop?
No, they are not within the same regression now. But we are trying to do it's still an experimental kind of thing. That's why you see those equations, they are still flat. But we want to do for individual crops.
Right. I was just a little bit nervous about potentially putting those together. Thank you.
Let me invite W.
Oh, yeah, thank you. If it's supplement what you say, yeah, say, I think the regressions will be crop specific with, and then the subsequent we have
You may just want to have a J like Y,
Yeah.
I, J, T,
Yeah.
and say J is the crop or something. To make it very clear.
So these are some of the stories that we are finding in the descriptives, and then so
Wait, sorry, before you proceed,
Mhm.
from the title, you had said that you're going to look at the crop productivity, then market performance, but then I did not see how you are going to measure market performance.
Oh,
I saw crop performance, so I don't know whether it's the same one.
so market performance, we are measuring it as the value of sales, crop sales, value in Ugandan shillings. But of course, performance is conditional participation. So there is a selection bias issue there. The people are already selected. If you have if household faces a decision, discrete decision of whether to participate, that's why we say the selection model, we do a profit. Then in the second stage, that's the market performance where we bring in a continuous value.
So you'll be having the amount of crop that is going to be sold. Because in the first stage, when you do the Heckman two-stage model, you have the profit model, whether you adopt or whether you sell or not. Then second stage, you're going to have a continuous a variable, a dependent variable.
Yeah,
So are you going to assess a different factor that are going to affect, the amount of crop being sold?
The
And then
restriction.
you are going to say that you have measured the market performance?
Yeah, I think we're trying to talk about the restrictions and what affects the market participation and doesn't affect market performance, and all that, the restrictions and the regression, if I get you right.
So in other words, you're saying participation, market participation, the same as market performance?
No, there are a bunch of restrictions that we have. Because, like I say, performance is conditional, participative. So there are some variables that can affect participation, cannot affect, that can affect performance, but not affect participation. So there are a bunch of restrictions that you have to do. It's like the way you do like the IV regressions and you do all that. So yeah, the set of regressors are not necessarily the same. I think maybe that's what you asking.
Let me just add, so the whole idea about using the Econ model has to do with the fact that there may be some bias. If you go straight to the performance one, you need first to control for the participation. And the key thing here is that in the second regression, actually, I mean, he's putting, the standard does it at once, right? But it's in explaining the steps. So in the first one, you kind of see the probability of participation conditioned on a number of factors. And then something called the inverse Mills ratio is generated from the first one. And then you incorporate on the second one to control for selection bias. And then you account for it. So the one requirement of the module, you need to find some variables. So the X variables are not exactly all the same in both. So some repeat, and there is a subset of variables that you need to find that affect participation but not performance. Say in this case, having a bicycle. If you have a bicycle, allows you to actually influence your decision to sell. You're able to take the things to the market, but not necessarily your performance as a seller. So a subset of the variables, so-called exclusion restrictions, have to be identified to be able to run these kinds of models. But the fundamental utility of it is actually to be able to control for the decision to participate. Otherwise, you're going to be working with a restricted sample of people, only people that sell, without accounting to the fact that the decision to sell is also an important factor. And then normally when you run the second regression, you look at that coefficient for the selection bias, and then you actually conclude whether or not it's worth controlling for it. But you have done it since you're controlling for the selection. So that's the thing. So if it cannot find the exclusion restrictions, the model is not well specified. Yeah.
Is the word participant market performance something very common? I don't know this literature, but is it the word that's borrowed from the literature, or you have coined it?
That's interesting. So I like we use the term market intensity of participation rather than performance. Therefore, the CSI is preferred than the volume. The volume per se, it's better to have something related to how much you actually produce. Therefore, the CSI, you can call it performance, but I would say marketing outcome or something like that. Yeah. So in fact, the term performance is, well, good or bad, whatever. Yeah. So.
But it's not a standard word used in the literature.
No, I don't think. I mean, outcome is definitely yes, but performance can be judged because there may be many ways you can measure performance. Yeah.
But
yeah, you can say. Yeah. But I'll be more convinced to keep the word performance related to some indicator that's relative to something than the absolute value.
Like the index.
Yeah, and the index is probably more related to some kind of performance. But yeah.
Yeah, but as for we are not kind of bringing something novel, at least so we can use that it's something that is.
Sometimes there's an efficiency measure that can be found. For example, the sales index relative to the person that actually has the highest sell index. You create some kind of relative indicator. In that sense, it proxies more, what you'd call performance. In that case, it is relative to other people. That's what we did for production efficiency. So
You only focus on crop sector, not livestock.
Yeah, sure. Like I said, when we were beginning, we had livestock, but when we say let's do crop, yeah, it's just how we do sector.
Yeah, I don't deal with the crop now. Maybe later we shall look at the livestock.
Okay, so about the data, we use the secondary data from the one SMS. That's the living standard and the integrated service for right. So in this case, it's commonly known as the Uganda National Panel Survey. So we're looking at the latest 4 waves. That's from 2013, 14, 19, 20. The main reason why we choose 4 because there are 7 waves. I think this is starting around 20. We are trying to run away from because our previous encounter with this data right before actually for the 2013-14 survey wave, there was a sample refresh where almost a third of households were refreshed bringing your household. So our previous encounter with this has showed that we can really learn serious trouble. So we hope that the 4 latest waves can suffice. So and then said it the last 3. So there is not a like huge reason here, but it's mainly because of attrition. So looking into the data, we are first of all restricting our sample agricultural households and those at least that have 1 crop in our agricultural crop. So we have look at the percentage of households growing is at least selected crops over time. And the reason why we choose at least these 5 is that these are the 5 most commonly crops in Uganda. We have 1 cash crop and food crops, but the food crops also major also now.
We have a comment.
Oh.
From David Mather. He says, comment on my wishes question. A term that I've seen used before equals value of crop sales divided by value of crop production is the commercialization index, which could be applied to 1 crop only to all crops produced by a farmer.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I was talking about the percentage of, so we see the evolution of how this goes. So the variations within these crops is that some are perennial, whereas others are annual. So that can influence the percentage that are growing for a wave. So what caught our eye was mainly this huge drop for maize that happened this year. And then the banana which dropped here. So first we were thinking maybe it's sample anomalies. So we tried to look at the households that were sampled from 2013 until now. But we see that after doing a balance panel, we see that this just slightly increases. Still the drop is there. So from 17, this is quite a huge number. But when we do a balance panel, it slightly increases by 2%. So we say, okay, it's maybe beyond sample anomalies and maybe new households can sample because we see that it is quite high. So we go further to find out what happened within here. And the questions we were asking is that farmers have reacted to conditions then. And we find that one thing that can validate our thinking is that just before here, I think it was 2018-19, Uganda experienced one of the lowest maize prices, where a program of grain was going for 200 shillings, and generally average a kilo goes for around 2,000 or 1,800. So that prompted us to say, okay, maybe farmers will respond to conditions. Yeah, it can. We thought that it is that, but we cannot conclusively say it's the reason. So then for bananas, it was the disease, the banana disease. So maybe going forward, still within the data, we are trying to explore what we found in literature and collaborate it and see whether we can confirm what has been discovered. So when we look at complementarity of agricultural use, the question is that farmers view these technologies as substitutes or they view them as complements. We want to supplement your organic fertilizers with organic fertilizers. We have an improved seed. Do you want to grow that and say it's done, or you want to complement and fertilizer. So the picture we see is that usage of organic fertilizers stands at maybe generally before I go into that, you note that adoption is quite the percentage of adoption of these so for organic fertilizers alone is slightly it's close to 7%. Even in organic fertilizers it's worse, 1.7%. But then when you say how many farmers, which percentage of farmers use a combination of organic and fertilizers, is 7%. So we improve the seeds. You say, okay, I'm going to say when you have an improved seed, you get more productivity when you supplement organic fertilizer. So how many use improved seeds and supplemented with seeds 0.5, but as improved seeds in isolation is close to 8%. So this kind of finding, though it's descriptive, is kind of in tandem with what Megan and Chris found. So there's kind of several good questions here that we will answer or may not answer now. Okay.
Gabby, hi Devlin. One combination I don't see in table 3 is organic and improved seed.
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, so we use some discretion here to choose this, but also supplemented what is in literature. The main reason why the main reason why we have now, for example, seeds and fertilizer is what we have read in literature. We thought, okay, it's exotic seed. Some of these seeds actually, the companies that make them, they issue them to grow well with some NPK. So growing it in isolation without any something you need to not work. Some of them don't even. So we thought, okay, that's if you have a seed something. But that is just our thinking. And so we
But
can
the
add
percentage would be probably organic fertilizer and improved seed. That's the missing one.
Yeah, I think.
Let's try it and see.
Yeah.
I mean, they are the two highest. numbers.
Exactly.
So-
That's why I
And
think.
if farmers are using them, why
Yeah.
not analyze it?
Yeah, let's see it. It's gonna be the highest combination for sure.
I think it would give
I didn't notice it before that.
Okay, just on that, how do you define improved seed? Is
Ah.
it farmer self-reported or
this.
DNA fingerprinting or some other sophisticated method?
I can't authoritatively say about fingerprinting because from the data, what we have is farmers were asked whether they have whether they plant traditional seeds or improved seeds.
So it's
So
farmer self-reporting.
Yeah, it's more or less, it's most probably self-reported. So you can have some reservations about it, but yeah, you can have some reservations. But I think it's quite, but still the percentages are that amazing. So moving on to what we do. So when we saw that picture of complementarity, which is very low, we're trying to see how does it vary maybe the gender or sex of the household head. Okay, women, because literature shows that maybe farms that are manned by women are slightly going to adopt these because they are good managers, but then the literature shows that they are chronically, okay, they are disadvantaged because they always manage the fertile farms. So all this, we thought we could disaggregate, do some disaggregation by the data of the household decision maker, then do some crop type and then run it. I maybe before I proceed, I should want to ask that the issue of land variations here can be a little bit tricky because it can kind of be geography specific, so we can have a discussion about this later. But for complementarity, if you look at isolation, the first column, the second column, the third column, and the fourth column, that's the input used in isolation. But then the last three columns is like you are using both. So we see that, yes, adoption is very low, but complementarity is very low. And it's low irrespective of the gender of the one who decides in the household that, oh, we should use it. But then, if you try to compare here, it's worse for the household. Now, in terms of crops, we see that bananas, and maybe also to note that these bananas, we have three types of bananas that are grown in Uganda. But what is most grown is banana, we call it banana food. We have banana sweet, which is like the yellow bananas, which we buy from supermarket. Then we also have what we call banana beer, which makes like alcohol and bottle. So here we isolate out, which is commonly used, grow, the one which makes food, on which we eat. Okay. So we see that there are some variations, but still also in terms of complementarity, you see that even some we find zero in terms of seeds. And this is, we even took some second look into the data without that. Got some wrong, but yeah, we can look again and over time, but it's quite revealing that in terms of seeds and so for freehold, maybe to briefly tell you about how land works. And freehold, this is land you can hold in perpetuity. You buy it and it's also, this one is associated with some form of secure ownership rights. So which gives you an incentive to adopt those sustainable agriculture.
Would you mind clarifying presentation?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we are looking at the heads in the household just to represent the household. So look at 5.6 and 6.8. So by just looking at them, we see that
No,
they are
I
really
think- I think she's asking maybe a column, if you were to add a column which says, this man, your sample is like say 1,000 households,
Oh,
200 are female headed, and say 800 are male headed, just to give some idea
Yeah.
on the importance of,
maybe
so maybe just add a column, make next
Oh, the-
or in a
yeah.
paper.
that,
But
that's
you know, to just to answer her question, are you talking about 20% of the households are female headed or 80% are female headed?
That's actually a very good question, but majority of the households actually in Uganda are headed by males. So you would want to say, okay, it's affected by the denominator. Yeah, I think actually that's a great question.
And that is gonna be useful for all the.
That's right,
all the
yeah,
items.
you want to just have a column with the N, your
Yeah.
N, what is the number of observations you're talking about?
Yeah.
To just get a relative importance.
Actually, that's it's kind of
wondering.
yeah, it's a good question. So maybe as I conclude here on the land tenure issue, sorry about that. I was saying freehold, this is associated with secure ownership rights. Leasehold is not popular, but it's also associated with secure ownership rights. Milo, this is relatively geography specific because it's within the central of the country. So maybe when we go into regressions, we want maybe. Yeah, so we can use some suggestions here because yeah, indeed, land chain can be specific. Yeah, we can use some suggestions here. So
So one question I have is they don't add, do they, well, again, this is a question of N, but just relative importance of how many do have lease on their land?
yeah, sure. That one we have it. Okay. This one because I have it open. So the percentage, majority of tenants have customary land.
Oh.
And it's around 52%, 52 or 51%. Now the next is freehold. it's around, if this is 52, actually, freehold, leasehold and mile share around only 3%.
23
Only 3%.
or 3%.
3%.
Okay.
So 97% is shared by freehold and customary,
Okay.
with customary slightly above. So most of the land is customary country. So you want to find out the freehold and the customary. Maybe if we can create some dummy which says customary and then bundle these. What do you think? You bundle this as non-customary.
Well,
I've seen a paper which
this
does
is
that.
just descriptive, so
Yeah.
here that's just adding that column on observation will give us some idea of how important a particular row is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe including a description, a verbal description or a text description of what freehold definition says definitions, because those terms are probably common to you bandits with to other folks.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah, they're not clear at all.
maybe as I conclude, freehold, I said it's like you own it in perpetuity, you buy it, you have a land title and all that. So with the leasehold, it's still more or less similar to freehold, but you have like 49 years or 99 years, and then they take it back or something, and then you can renew your lease. So these two are kind of associated with, they can correlate with income. So people who can afford to buy them. So there is some income level somewhere. Then with Milo, this is geography specific. It comes from colonial masters, like when the British were rewarding the Uganda Kingdom for collaborating with them. So they gave them a lot of mile land, but it was in square miles. That's why it's even called Milo comes from miles. So this is geography specific. So you can set collapse it, but this is the biggest issue that we can discuss because it includes the land that is owned communally, plan, and then the biggest issue with this is that it has issues with the ownership rights. Like you don't have those ownership rights, which can create an disincentive adopting this system. So maybe briefly, as I will conclude with the descriptives, we see that, okay, in terms of farming implements, this is at a farm level, percentage of farmers see that the trend was kind of politics. Okay, so this kind of decreases as we move from the farming. So I think this also kind of validates the fact that technology adoption, but it presents us with an issue come to the creation of the data points that. So I don't know which story we can say from here, but it seems like something that can be informative, something in our story in terms of but certain that can give us a couple of dummies in terms of some of this. So what I'm going to present now is kind of very preliminary. I'm actually a couple of hours looking at which models should adopt, and we have all these different models. So we have not entirely decided this, so we can use them. So this is what we ran some time back. By me looking at this, it shows that we still have a long way to go. We still have a lot to control. We have more control. And I want to mention that here we don't have the fixed effects, but I will show it in a word because we just shoot a couple of hours. So what we can take from this is that we're trying to look at the correlations. Are they coming through irrespective of the model that we are? What is some of these interactions? So the model can explode, but then our issue with interactions. So, like I said, we are doing the correlations. So we look at organic fertilizers and we see that it is significant throughout this, and and fertilizer is significant. But then what's the story that we want to tell when we have such results, so however much they are not conclusive? For example, you want to say, okay, organic fertilizers included in the same model, these are the inputs like organic fertilizers, it significantly affects the crop productivity as we transform from the low heat and all that. So I was here when my colleagues were presenting, and someone asked the question, okay, when you look at the coefficient, what's the policy issue that you can communicate? It's significant that you can communicate in terms of percentage points and all that. So I think we can have quite a good story here. So we have a couple of interactions, though we do not have significance yet, but it's a finding. So what we see in terms of area, we see in literature, there is a tendency that these smallholder farmers are more productive compared to large farmers, large scale farmers. But I think okay, lately that is being debunked. It's not entirely true. It can also depend on how you do it. And the issue here is that we are using partial productivity.
So now this is crop specific or?
No, this is overall. This is overall. This is overall.
So then this raises the question that was asked when you were presenting your model.
Yes.
You said you were going to estimate this per crop, or at least that's how.
Yeah, but I'm going to show a slide as that we can.
So how did you measure crop productivity across all the crops?
This is total, it's aggregated, and it's like,
In value?
yes,
In value?
no, it's output by the input land. So this is basically land
But
productivity.
how would you combine
you-
coffee with maize and cassava and?
Yeah. So that's what I said, is that this is just trying to show us a picture of what's happening. So it's like the overall crop productivity.
But what's your
But the
unit?
definition of
When you
crop
say
productivity.
what's the unit?
The unit
It's just
it's in
kg,
kilograms
it's
per
kilogram.
kilograms per acre.
Yeah, but then it's a very much a function of I'm growing cassava, I will have a high productivity because cassava is so heavy. And
Yeah.
if I were growing coffee, the cherries don't weigh that much.
Yeah, and related to that, there's kind of from the descriptive tables that you just showed before, there's some crops you do a lot of these practices on, which you kind of argue that potentially those are more productive for those specific crops than otherwise. I'd really recommend splitting that out as soon as possible. I just think you're going to see a lot of
This
interactions between like recommended practices for certain types of separate, and one thing I do think that is pretty interesting is the lack of significance or even positive values on your interaction. Potentially these types of practices would be maybe considered to be substitutes for each other in this case. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, sure. And it can be.
You can still do the value, you can just add the value of total production and divide that by land and do the same model estimation, but not kilograms. It has to be in a common unit.
Yeah, sure. So maybe to that, let me see if that comes out here. If we try to do space crops, or we have productivity of beans here in the first column, beans, cassava. Like I say, some of these they are lacking some. Like we still have to control for a lot. Specific crops, and all that. But what we see is that yes, we can see some droppings in terms of the observations, which we are going to check and see. There's also a debate on whether these zeros, yeah, it's specifically how we are going to measure this, but the story is that still, you can say, for example, for maize, though it's not significant, but we see at least positive or coffee quite steady. So it can still show us that we still have a couple of things to go for. But the story that she's saying that when we interact, we can have a good story when, say, for example, these use isolation. When we did that, though it's not presented here, is that there is still no significance, which can tell us that, yes, indeed, it can confirm what we found in the descriptive, that these inputs are indeed viewed as substitutes rather than components. So that's one story that we can go away with. The other story is that, which we can enhance, is that, okay, we're looking at smallholder farmers. So what's this story around here, where it is indeed say, okay, the smallholder farmers are more productive, irrespective of the crop they grow, compared to large scale farmers. But if you have such a finding, which I think this is kind of a U, like you say, it's like this, then isn't it? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's a you.
That's a U. I think that kind of suggests that, yeah, smallholder farmers are not entirely as productive as you most of the literature say. That's another story that we can try to have on. The issue of tenure, I think when we control for area specific effects, we can use enumeration, but we can use some suggestions from the audience. We can see whether this comes out. But as for
Can you
now,
explain what your sample is here? Because I'm confused. You say you are using 4 rounds of survey, but then your number of observations are, is it pooled across 4 rounds or panel households across 4 rounds, or
Yeah.
what is your
yeah, actually,
your observations and number of households are very similar to each other, even though they are across 4
Yeah.
rounds.
yeah. So the issue here with the observation is was we had this significant number of zeros. So the debate is, when you are calculating these measures of hours, the outcome, should you have zeros or should they have zeros? Because that also fits in when you try to talk.
But 0 in
Right.
what? The
Right.
numerator or denominator? I mean,
Uh,
if somebody planted something and got 0 output, is that what you mean by 0?
that also has been
Or is it like, I mean, you have to understand how the data was coded. What does 0 mean? If 0 means actually nothing was harvested, then you have to include that.
yeah, sure.
You cannot exclude that, because that's biasing. By excluding it, you're biasing your results. But if 0 is a code for something, and you need to look at the survey, whatever coding manual or something, and if 0 stands for no data collected, then you can exclude them.
Even
But
you
you have to understand what 0 means, that
You're going to say missing rather than zeros.
Yeah, there's an issue of missings, and then there's an issue of zeros. When you come, for example, the different technologies are adopting. For example, if a farmer grows maize, but it's not adopting any technology, then you come, okay, let's say.
No, that is a different thing. No, if they're not adopting,
That's
you don't exclude them.
you exclude.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, but then the biggest issue was when we come these monotonic transformations of outcomes. The issue is whether we transform the observation drastically from in log, which one comes in, you put some negatives, we have, let's say, zeros, and yeah, that's an issue. But that's an issue we discussed today and said it. Go back and check. So because when I log it and I have some zeros and I've seen some people try to add something.
Well, there are techniques to handle zeros in a log transformation that you can, there's literature on that. You can use that, but that should not be the reason for dropping them.
I've seen
There are
some.
ways to handle that. But still, I don't think I understand why your number of observations and number of households are so similar. Are they like if in your house, if there are 326 households and you have 4 years of data for those households, shouldn't that be 4 times in terms of number of observations?
Like the N times T.
Well, I think there's 2 questions here. How many panel waves have you included in this regression?
4 according to the table.
Is it 4? Have all 4 panel rounds been included in this regression?
Yeah, they are 4. Yeah, but the way they are pulled is that it cannot make sense when you have such a, of course, you would expect that the number of observations when you multiply by 4, they will be high here. But the issue is mainly the variable, the regressors features. And
I think it's something that we check.
Okay,
It's
Yeah,
something
yeah.
that we
just something that is
Yeah.
very obvious of.
But one thing, let me mention one thing here. If you, so 326 could be the number of the balance panel households, and 348, the number of adding those households that are not in the balance panel. Could be, but let's check it. I mean, that would be a possible situation here. But this is not would not be the number of observations because the households,
yeah, you would have the N, then you multiply by the 4, then
right, would be much higher. But the number of balance panel households versus because you did mention that they got a refresh of the sample and they added more households, whatever. So that would justify this kind of difference, but there's to be clarity about what you're talking about.
yeah,
Whether it's the sum of the, the pooled sample households total or the number of households that are in all samples versus whatever. Yeah. So, and that matters a lot here.
we discussed it, but then
We had concerns this morning about the number of observations. It looks like too small.
Yeah.
And
Yes,
even
it does.
the proportion of households growing maize, for example,
4 rounds
in
of
that
survey.
country, 11 point something looks really low.
Yeah, there's
but
something wrong.
yeah, but with the proportion, that's right.
Yeah, that's right.
The proportion, because if it's 11, then it give you like one average, like 700, something. So yeah, the issue here is it's one of the values. So
And also make sure, because these are sample survey, you are using sample weights
yeah,
to adjust everything to national representation.
yeah, the good thing, the weights are, yeah, they are each wave has a weight, so we can see how we get that final sample. Final weight. So I wanted to present some results we had. Okay, we like I presented the random effects, which was a strong assumption of correlation. This is not what we are going to present. So earlier on, a couple of hours, we ran the full OLS, a different set of regressors. We did the random effects together with the post looking exactly like the full OLS. So fortunately, the Ostman has pointed us to the fixed effects. And of course, we shall be able to report household fixed effects and those. Yeah.
Any reason why the seeds aren't in this section?
Yeah.
Improved seeds, the improved seeds.
Oh, sure. It's not there. But yeah, that's it. It's not there. But it's in the subset.
So you ran it separately, because I don't see the fertilizer on this one.
Yeah, but we ran with the same number of regressors, but the issue is that we used some description of what to report for each, but the results, I think, screen presentation shall have to show it. The other issue is that some of these tables explode and then you have to use some situation report. Maybe I should point out why go further is that when you look at our inverse Bayes ratios, we run this manually by running the first selection model, then we do calculate the lambdas manually, then we feed in this. It's not like the normal way of running the H. So we are supposed to run the F one at first, and then but I wasn't confident about what was given because of the restrictions and all that. So we can discuss the restrictions and which one influences the other, but then this is just to show us a picture of what we can expect. But then the inverse Bayes ratios show us that we still have
The IMR, maybe some IMR, and both of them.
Inverse Mills ratio.
those are inverse Bayes ratios that are specific to this, but as you can see, yeah, we still have a. So I don't know if I can. Yes.
So basically that significance is telling you that it is important to control for selection bias in the first stage. So therefore your specification on the marketing outcome is better specified now that you actually controlled for selection in the first stage. Yeah. If you had just jumped straight into the second stage, a lot would be unexplained by the fact that.
Okay, I wanted to spark off some discussion here, so it's something.
But can you present the fixed effect result?
Yeah, but I thought maybe.
Oh, he said it somewhere.
Okay, this is not like a slide, but I wanted to show us some. Besides what. Okay, can we see this one? Okay, this is it. Here we have run the preliminary tests where you say, okay, which model should you go with and which one should you not go with. So with the pooled OLS, you see that it's looking more or less exactly like the random events. You can see clearly. This is kind of similar. So there's strong assumption and correlation is not correlated. The unobserved unobservables are kind of not correlated with very strong here. So what we do with a fixed difference is that it kind of is not suffering from the limitations of the strong assumption of the random effects model, and it is going to help us run the so fix the effects for a bunch of stuff, something like that, which is geographed and then random. So the Osman shows that we should do. I've not presented the results, but it shows that.
What's the dependent variable here?
Yeah, here we have the productivity, which is hold, and then we did the specific for crop, but then the equations are more or less unspecific. For the specific crops, we go ahead and run the fixed effects models. So we don't have significant results for some of our inputs. So the story is there. So I don't know whether this changes. The story of smallholder farmers and large scale farmers does not change, irrespective of which model you run, whether it's robust or not. That story does not change.
Well, it does change. It's not significant anymore.
Yeah, for the fixed. Yes. But hopefully is that when we control for a bunch of some other stuff here, the story will be good. So I wanted to show us that we are kind of coming closer to deciding, but also solicit for some some discussion here. What else can we control, hoping that the story will come out?
Are these
And-
exhaustive list of your controls, or you're only presenting subset of?
That this is a subset. We have this, we have control for like soil type, we have control for tenure, we have control for area with and we include organic fertilizers, We have control for maybe rain-fed and irrigated parcels. We kind of control for the farm implement, like say handle and all that. So, and some graphics with some interactions, we use kind of, I don't know what.
But all variables are shown there, right?
Yeah, the variables are in here.
Okay.
But our anticipation is that for fixed effects, why I presented is what else can we control for besides the household effects? Because the thinking is that the model is still precise. It's not yet there. So from the audience, what else can we control for those? When we have this crop specific.
What about all the technologies, like seed is still not there, pesticide is not there? I don't know, like you had list of technologies you were going to be looking at, but you're not including them. Are you going to look at each technology at a time, or?
The other issue about the question of the observations, when we reached here, we kind of resolved it, and I think you see that observations are kind of changing. So I wanted to present that.
But if the fixed effect, you still don't have balanced panel.
Yeah, sure, yeah, it's not yet balanced. We are still dealing with that.
This question might be just asked, it's one that we kind of discussed a little bit, whether it would be worth actually looking at one technology at a time, or doing this way and then ensure the others are there. I think that getting some feedback on that one would be important. And the other thing is that all this thing about the small versus large farmers effects, I mean, the way we're modeling right now, just having this area squared, it's one way to look at it, but could be more precise if you create, for example, threshold of land ownership, and then interact that with a particular technology. So that way you can actually see the effect of the technology at different scales. That could be a possible.
I mean, I'm not,
Option.
you didn't present the descriptive of land ownership, like what is the average land size in Uganda in your sample?
Yeah.
You say these are smallholder farmers, how small they are, like average land holding size in your sample, so.
Yeah,
Or the
sure.
distribution of land size in your sample, maybe some descriptive on that will help us understand.
I think even the visuals can do some visualization of that. We have some.
It doesn't matter, just maybe what do you call those quartiles or quintiles of land, and just presenting some descriptives by that would be also.
I think that's a great
But also
idea.
just the mean, what is the mean of that variable? Are we talking like 5 acres per household or 0.5 acres? per
Yeah,
household?
it doesn't reach there, but it varies with crop per crop, and the highest is banana food. Banana is the one that is grown at high. So, but with maize, you can find the mean, because according to what we usually look at in terms of the data visualization, maize is and majority of the farmers actually have like 2 acres. So when you do some data visualization, the scatter is around there below 2 acres. So yeah.
My other suggestion would be just drop urban households from this, because of urban agriculture, most likely they are very small plots. Closer you go to the urban area, the value of land is higher, and you tend to have small plots. And then when you're combining those small plot agricultural households, you're defining them as still agricultural households or doing agriculture. with rural area households who may have larger land. And just for even, at least for robustness, whatever you do, also do just by dropping them to see if your results hold.
Yeah, it's actually interesting. The LSMS ISA brought this kind of confusion. If you go to agricultural service in country, they really draw agricultural rural households and it's cleaner. When you are in this one, it's gonna make a huge difference in the results. I've been confronted with this in Malawi, for example. I decided to just go to the rural sample, and everything was much clearer.
Yeah.
So you're right. There is a lot of noise with this urban setting.
Yeah,
But ISA, because it's a consumption and agricultural survey, they have these rural and urban samples, and we learned that actually there are a lot of agricultural households in urban areas, but still, for analytical purposes, isolating the rural sample
to me,
is
characteristically,
better.
those quote unquote agricultural households in urban area will be very different than they would be in rural areas, which is, agriculture would be their main source of livelihood. I mean, I doubt there are that many urban people whose main source of livelihood is agriculture.
Yeah, there's Africa, we have this urban, because some actually rural, but by administrative definition, you call them urban, but you look at them, they are really rural anyway. So one believes that by controlling for the area of residence, you're actually taking care, but you're not taking care of it. So I would go for working with rural.
I don't know how many observations will drop out, but
It's 10%.
10% of this.
10%.
So about 200 households will drop out.
Yeah, just let's get rid of them. I would think it would be a good idea to.
90%.
It's cleaner
in our samples. So I wanted to come up some for the few minutes we are remaining with. I wanted to, there is something that we are thinking of doing in terms of contribution. There's this thing that we have been discussing for quite a while. How we want to contribute literature and how to use market performance. And we have seen a couple of papers that have done this. I think it's still online. There's a colleague who also suggested that we go that way by looking at the control function approach, where we develop our productivity. The term side, then we have it in the productivity regressions, then also transfer it to a market participation regressions, and maybe put that as the right hand side variable regression. So I was thinking that hoping that you have kind of interface research kind of approach, because literally one of the limitations of the land productivity we have is the partial measure productivity, and you're going to face a lot of trouble with convincing leaders that this is. So by bringing in total factor productivity, of course, in addition to the different disaggregation to crop level, different crops productivity by different crops, we could do this. So I was thinking we could get some feedback from you on how we can do this. Yeah. And then for the IV approach, we have a couple of suggestions where some people suggest that, okay, if you have, for example, organic fertilizers and you're going to do an IV, you can say, for example, say this farmer has livestock alongside crops, and the assumption is that they would apply organic fertilizer. It can be quite noisy. So I would also want your input on. If you look at technology, and we are supposed to run an IV, what are some of the constraints that come out?
Why do you want to use IV? Sorry, I didn't understand the reason why you want to. You have panel data.
Yeah.
Why do you want to use IV?
Yeah, the reason we went that way, yeah, now it's great actually. We received some feedback that, yeah, even if you do a Heckman and you have controlling selection bias and all. Are you entirely want to worry? So
In what? Endogeneity in what? What is your outcome variable that you want to?
yeah, for the market, the technology being an endogenous variable. So we had reservations for that, but these are comments that have come the presentations. So we want to get your assurances that, for example, when we have a fixed effects model, should include what about endogeneity, even when we run Ekman.
You are trying to explain productivity as a function of crop adoption, correct?
Yes.
And you're looking for an IV to explain what adoption decision?
Yeah, in the event that a technology is endogenous, is not entirely exogenous. For example, the organic fertilizer, is it entirely exogenous?
Well, do you have any exogenous factor that can explain the adoption? That's what you're looking for, correct? To then make your adoption not in, and take the two-step approach. Estimating the effect of adopting a technology on crop productivity. I mean, the adoption is so low in your
Yeah,
sample.
Yeah, that's actually
0.5% of farmers are using some of your technologies.
30%.
Yeah.
I was
The highest was 7 point something
7.9.
in organic fertilizer.
So
And in organic fertilizer is produced mostly, it's not a marketed commodity, it's produced on the farm, correct?
Okay.
No, sorry, the organic fertilizer, which is the highest. Yeah, it's just on the farm produced.
Yes.
So farmers who have livestock would be using that.
yes,
Yeah,
and that
which means they may be better off farmers anyway.
yes, and then that makes it not. So I was thinking is looking at all these different inputs, is there like some form of like it will having inputs bundled together into one index so that that's blowing up my mind and figure it out. Is any approach? Because yeah, I don't know if there is any method. I've not come across it with some way of bundling the inputs together, because you wouldn't say we have a dummy that whether use organic fertilizer in a bid to increase observations. You can do that.
Good. Okay, well, I think we kind of
Yeah, thank you for
at the
listening.
limit of our time here. So first of all, I really want to thank everybody who came. I really appreciate you coming. We know that you're all busy. Thank you to online participants. Devlin has said, they're still very much looking for ideas and input. So if you have any ideas or thoughts about the questions that the team is working on, please feel free to send an email. If you don't have Devlin's email, please send it to me. I'll forward them about and as usual. Thank you so much. Let's give them a round of applause.